But we're really honored to have our last panel of the day. And again, I want to thank everybody for, I hope you had a good lunch. Thank you for coming back. And we're honored to have with us some folks that do what I do, but in their own individual state. And it's sort of like you really develop a really good camaraderie with folks around the United States of America. We meet on a quarterly basis. We can kind of talk about that if you want. Down in D.C., we also, the Northeast group here, talks once a month. We discuss best practices. We discuss why we're pulling our hair out, what this can't happen, why this happens. It's just a great group of people, remarkably stable in the sense that we haven't had a lot of turnover in our group. And it's really led by the NGA, the National Governors Association, which pulled us all together and got us all under one roof, along with Mitch and Landrew, who's running this program, and a whole bunch of other people. So right now I'm going to ask Minelly from New York to come on and join us, Chris Farrell from Rhode Island, and Quentin Palfrey from Massachusetts, and Tom Curtin from the NGA. He's a program director for infrastructure, is the great conductor, I guess, and he'll come forward, and we'll start with our panel. And look, if in the end, if you got a question about where is this money, how do I get a hold of this money, ask it. Don't be afraid to ask it, okay? So, Tom?
All right. Well, good to see everybody. Good to see my friends here from New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. So welcome. This has been a great event so far, and really thanks for having us. As Mark said, when IIJA passed 2 years ago, NGA dove in and started working on implementation right away and pulled together a network of governors, infrastructure coordinators, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to work with this group. And this group in particular has been real leaders on getting together themselves, getting together with the rest of the group, talking through all the various issues that everybody's been facing. And, you know, I guess I'll kind of pick up where the governor left off this morning, talking about Connecticut's transformation and how that fits in with the region. So, you know, Mark, I'd love to, you know, kind of open up with the group here on what you've been doing here in Connecticut and how you've been structuring the office and making sure that everybody knows about these opportunities.
So I'll be brief. You guys hear from me all the times, and I want to make sure our guests have an opportunity to share their thoughts. But essentially, we have a very small team called the CT Built team. We do have our own quarter zips, so they're pretty cool, but you got to be really cool to get one. But our job and role is basically to help implement this program across agencies, as well as cities and towns and other stakeholders throughout our state. Part of that involves going out and visiting. I've been to almost every town or city in the state of Connecticut, met with the mayors, first selectmen, their planning directors, engineers, worked with the COGs, who are represented here as well, and their executive directors to share with them the possibilities and the promise of this program, and then to make sure that we have no silos within state government. When I first took this role, some people got very nervous, and you know, as we know, everybody in state government likes to say, "This is mine, and you can't touch this." And who are you? And I had to assure them that, look, I don't want to be the commissioner of the railroads. That's not what I'm doing here. My job is to help you do your job. We're a force multiplier within state government, kind of a crash team that comes in and helps out when needed. But our agencies determine which projects get done, what order they get done, what priority they are, and we're simply here to help facilitate them, and we're catch-all. So if we see a grant maybe that somebody hasn't applied for, we immediately go to the relevant agency and we go, hey, what's the problem with this? Why didn't we apply? And sometimes there just isn't capacity. Hey, I have more people to write these grants. I just don't have more time. Other times it might be just doesn't fit within our long-term strategic view for the state and what we're trying to do. So with that, I take all that stuff and we distill it down in our office. We read every NOFO, that's notice of funding, for these opportunities that come out from the federal government. And they come out at weird times. These guys will tell you it's like 8 o'clock on a Friday night. They want to spend $3 billion. It has to be in Monday morning. So we tear it all apart and figure out how we can apply for that and participate in it. And so in that program, you know, Connecticut, we've been very successful. We're proud of our results. We measure our metrics and put that out every quarter. I know there's been some frustration, I think, amongst particularly our friends in the construction industry, the engineering industry, say, hey, this money's not flowing the way it should. It's coming. A lot of it, what you see now is planning dollars that are going out. It's small amounts that are going to be leveraging much larger amounts down the line. And so it's been exciting and interesting and extremely complicated, but I couldn't do it without these folks.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mark. And, just going down the line, Chris, how are you approaching this in Rhode Island, and what has Governor McKee charged you with infrastructure related?
A lot. So I was looking at the salted caramel martini. Don't miss that. That's $13. Looks pretty nice. So I'm the IJ coordinator for the state of Rhode Island. I'm also the senior advisor to the governor. Basically, we're pretty small, our office. It's just me, and then I also have a policy advisor who's a good kid. But basically, what we do is we've organized an interagency task force. So I, every quarter, meet with all of the agencies that are affected by or have an opportunity to get funding from the IIJA bill. I also do IRA as well, so I kind of combine the two into one. And then I meet with each of those agencies on a monthly basis. So they've all appointed a point person for IIJ and IRA, and then I meet with them. And then we kind of go through what grants are available, what grants they've applied for, and I kind of pair them up with either other agencies that could help them out or with some of our private sector folks. When I first got in there, I tried to find capacity as much as possible because I knew it was just going to be me. So luckily we have a great private organization called the Partnership for Rhode Island. And I think there's one that's going to be coming to Connecticut, hopefully. And what it is it's 15 of the largest company CEOs in Rhode Island, and they've come together as a consortium. And their mission is to help provide solutions, or to team up with the state, with cities and towns to provide solutions to big problems. So one thing they did in 2017 was commission a study of the province public school system, which wasn't doing too well. And then they also came to us about the gas tax. That's going to be a problem that everyone here will probably hear about in 2 or 3 years. And then they also came to us about IIJ, and I met up with Tom, who's the executive director, and we created a public-private partnership called Compete RI. And what Compete RI does is it provides capacity resources to our cities, our towns, our state agencies, and even some private partners that want to apply for these grants. I'm sure a lot of you, or some of you, have heard from your cities and towns that they don't have a grant writer on staff, or they don't have engineers or planners to go after these grants. And so what Compete RI does is it pretty much is a consulting firm. It signs on grant writers from across the country. It's been given $500,000 by the Partnership for Rhode Island, which was very generous from them. And they deploy these grant writers to cities and towns that need these capacity building resources, or engineers or planners, and helps them write these grants. Now, they have been a part of teams that have secured over $200 million in competitive grants. Those are the grants that you don't just get with formula funds. It's about 35% of IIJ is competitive, where you're, just as it sounds, you're competing against other cities, towns, states for these grant funds. $200 million is big in Rhode Island. It's not big everywhere else, but it's a good chunk of change in the state that's the size of a county. So that's how we organize. We have the interagency task force. Then I meet with all of the agencies, and then we have this public-private partnership called Compete RI that has been really successful for us, and that's how we organize it.
All right, I'll go down to Minelly. How are you doing
so,
in New York?
Yeah, so New York is also operating in the small but mighty category. I have one person, and some support. But really what we try to do, or really what I try to do with my immediate principal, the Director of State Operations, is to really work through our existing structures, both at the governor's office, through our deputy secretaries that are the ones that are actually supporting our agencies on a day-to-day basis, and through our network of regional directors across the state of New York. I think folks that have ever driven between New York City and Buffalo can have a good grasp of how massive the state actually is. And I think, as I was mentioned in one of the panels earlier today, it really puts into question the approach, or like the thought that one solution applies across the board, and we know that for a fact in New York that is not the case. So we really try to engage through our regional teams and our regional director teams to ensure that we're actually working to address the needs of the specific communities, and really have that that really drive our policy. Our governor, having been a local elected, is very in tune and really wants to hear. It's like, okay, so we can come in, like we recognize what the needs are, in our roads and in our obviously. In our water infrastructure and beyond, and as well as set policies on climate. I think we have one of the most ambitious climate agendas in the country. But the reality is that how do we achieve those goals is really and should really be driven by our communities. So when I talk about our infrastructure program in the state of New York, I really always go back to 3 principles that I think guide all of our work. And it's focused on equity, climate, and workforce. So when we are looking through the programs and portfolios, particularly, going through that exercise right now as we're gearing up for our upcoming, state of the state and our upcoming budget, is really looking at the priorities that our agencies are teeing up, and as well as the requests that are coming in from our stakeholders, and navigating each of those programs and projects, proposals, ideas through those lens, right? Is it addressing the equity concerns and like the just historic disinvestment in many of our mostly Black and brown communities? Are we addressing and are we working towards tackling our climate goals and agenda? And are we building the workforce not just of today, but the workforce that we need to be able to deliver and continue to maintain the infrastructure that we're building?
Yeah, and I want to double down on that just a little bit because, Chris observed very early on in this process that the role of the infrastructure coordinator is a lot like a traffic cop and a storyteller. Yeah. And, working in the community and with folks like the folks assembled in this room to really bring together the ideas and then frame it through those priority lenses is something that we hear from our governor's offices throughout the country as everybody is trying to align those priorities to make each state the most competitive and put their best foot forward. So it's really a common theme that really benefits from the collaboration and cooperation from folks like you all here in Connecticut to kind of come to the table and do that together. So it's, yeah. Quentin, you're the newest member of the group up here, but I got to say, Governor Healy really came out of the gate swinging on infrastructure, and she's got some really ambitious priorities. So, would love to.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, I wanted to begin with just a huge shout out to the Connecticut team. You all are so lucky, those of you who are in Connecticut, to have Mark and Steve and this whole team are real sort of national leaders in this work. And I've learned a ton from this team and also from Chris and Minelly and from Tom in the time since Governor Healy came into office. So I work for a new governor, Governor Maura Healey of Massachusetts, and she was actually a former professional basketball player. And I think that sort of competitive spirit carries over into the way that she's thought about seizing this extraordinary moment of opportunity. I mean, I think that we're living through a moment with these 3 pieces of legislation, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act, that we're never going to see again. We're in a moment where there's more than $1 trillion of federal resources that are available as kind of rocket fuel for the agenda of these governors in these states. And what I was charged with doing was really building an infrastructure for going after these resources and for working with others in the region to kind of seize these opportunities. Let me tell you just a moment about how we've structured it in Massachusetts, and it aligns not coincidentally with some of what our colleagues have done, because you look around and you try and build off of these best practices, and these are absolutely the best practices, these 3 states that I'm up here with. But so the governor, I report directly to the governor, and she created a new office for us to lead through an executive order. It's based in our Executive Office of Administration and Finance, which is essentially our budget office. I do have a pretty substantial team. Like my colleagues, we have an interagency effort that I lead that has representatives from each of the cabinet secretariats, so that we can think about these big cross-cutting initiatives with an intersectional lens. The governor also appointed on day one a climate chief in the cabinet to make sure that we're sort of thinking about clean energy and decarbonization and resiliency in that kind of intersectional way. We also launched recently something called the Federal Funds Partnership, which, like how Mark and Chris and Minelly were talking about, is a vehicle for engaging with cities and towns and tribes, because so many of these resources are available primarily to our municipal partners, and trying to build their capability to pursue these really transformational opportunities. And then a big shout out to the NGA and to the White House, because Mitch Landrieu, and I don't know how many of you know sort of who this is. He's the infrastructure czar under President Biden. He's really driven the implementation, particularly of the BIL, over the last 2 years. And we have an opportunity to come together as a group, think about ways that we can work together, and think about ways that we can leverage our relationships in the federal government to make sure that we're being successful in these federal government applications. And, as my colleagues mentioned, some of this, honestly, is about fighting for the biggest share of the pie. And some of this, we are trying to get scarce resources to advance our priorities. But there's so many ways, and this is particularly true in New England, where we're in this together. When we're talking about our clean energy goals, it's not Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut and New York, each in our own little worlds. We have to think together about how we build that capacity. When you're talking about regional transit and making sure that high-speed rail is available across the Northeast Corridor, we're in that together. And with so many of these grant opportunities, we're thinking about how do we collaborate as a region, how do we solve these problems together. And so I've really enjoyed that partnership. One last thing, I do want to build on something that Minelly said, which is there's some really important cross-cutting goals that I think span through these pieces of federal legislation and certainly motivate a lot of our work. And we need to be putting climate at the front of everything that we do. We need to be thinking about equity and environmental justice communities and the Justice 40 rules, and sort of how do we make sure that the folks who have historically not received federal government investment, not received the amount of attention for supporting those communities, that we put the resources there. And we need to work with our friends in organized labor and really focus on making sure that these are family-sustaining wages, that we have the best labor standards, that we're thinking about apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship and labor force participation goals, and making sure that everyone gets the benefit of these transformational opportunities, because there's a huge amount of money here, but there are better and worse ways of spending it, and there are better and worse ways of planning about how we take advantage of these opportunities to really change our states and our region. And so, it's really inspiring to be able to work with these colleagues to do that work.
Yeah, that regionality is really a theme of the day. And, I see how important this is. As Mark mentioned earlier, I'm a product of this region. The reason I got into infrastructure work is because I grew up here, and I know how important it is. Minelly, I'm going to come back to you on this because over the last 2 years, every time I talked to you or your counterpart in New Jersey, you were either had just been on the phone, were on hold because you're talking to each other, or about to be on a call with each other. How important is that relationship every day to day?
It's literally make or break for many of our projects and programs. And I think, to Quentin's point about the partnership and the fact that, I think time and time again have learned that we go much further when we're together than trying to chip at these issues, one by one. So I think particularly with the partnership with the state of New Jersey to really get the Gateway Hudson Tunnel project shaped to set up an organization to actually deliver this, $16+ billion project or program, and to make sure, and for me, I'm an infrastructure nerd, I'm an engineer by training, and for me, it's really important that we're setting up these efforts for success, and thinking about not just the immediate, dynamics and immediate realities that we all are trying to navigate while there's a ton of pressure from the federal government and beyond to deliver, but that we're also thinking about, our future selves in our current roles, and thinking about, what we might be punting to them, and are those things that we should just be, kind of resolving now. And what that really means is, really a lot of conversations, a lot of just kind of coming to the table together. And honestly, it's all just kind of like the basics of negotiations, right? Is understanding where your hard lines, where your absolutes lie, but also recognizing that you have to be able to bend a little bit. You have to be able to compromise, because at the end of the day, I think we would probably, for I was probably 9 weeks or so where we were meeting 2 to 5 times a week to really shape those initial agreement documents, to just really kick the project into high gear, was really, kind of starting and ending each meeting with an agreement that we're all trying to get this to the finish line. And when that's the unified kind of goal, I think, everything else just kind of just comes together. But it really does mean that you have to, kind of put aside some egos, put aside a lot of the pressures and the dynamics that I think we all recognize we're all working through, and mutually agree that we are actually trying to solve this. We're actually trying to move this forward, and then, just put a lot of really, really tight deadlines from the federal government, and and it kind of just forces the relationship to happen. But I think more, on a regional level, what it really has meant for us is that we're really learning from each other. And I think, folks that are familiar with the bipartisan infrastructure law specifically, I think recognize that roughly $500 billion of those $1+ trillion in BIL was new money, right? Was new funding. So a lot of the creativeness and a lot of the how are we leveraging multiple opportunities, or our ability, to actually get the best bang for our buck here is really, kind of learning from each other, and really trying to share those best practices, which is really, I think, what we do, when we come together. And honestly, the dynamic and through Tom and the NGA team, it's never been as collaborative in my 15+ years in this work. So.
Excellent, thank you. And I want to come back to that in a minute, but it really is. It's all about the implementation. And
Yeah.
Hank said it earlier. It's not the sexy stuff, but it's. And I'll throw this out there. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, you guys came together on a tri-state procurement arrangement recently to advance some of these goals in the offshore wind space. Anybody, I'll throw that open to the three of you that want to talk about how important that is for not only the goals that you're setting in climate and in energy and in workforce, but how important is it to really kind of head down, come together, and pull something like that together on procurement, the most interesting topic that there is in government, right up there with permitting
And taxes.
and taxes. Yeah.
Chris, you want?
Well, a lot of my energy director had a lot to do with it, but it was important for Rhode Island. I mean, Rhode Island, to be competitive, we kind of have to band together. So we were kind of the first in the offshore wind specter, but it's become a lot more difficult with different interest rates, with procurement, with different regulations not coming out of the federal government. So, to be able to be competitive, and I think also with New York and Massachusetts as well, and with Connecticut, I mean, it was almost forced to come together, although we are always working together on multiple different areas. But this was born out of necessity as well. And what was really cool about it is how quick it came together, because my energy director, I mean, I check in with him all the time on IIJ, IRA. I'm definitely on offshore wind. My boss is very interested in that. And so I was surprised by how quick everyone came together on an agreement. It was almost over just like a couple of months. And I was already at the finish line. It surprised me. I thought he was kidding with me. He's like, "Yeah, we're ready." I'm like, "Really? You're ready? Did you read everything?" But no, it was great. And so, but it was spurred not only by necessity, but out of partnership that we have over a range of different items. But pass over here.
I mean, we're proud of some of the ways in which Massachusetts is unique, but with something like climate, and certainly when you're sort of thinking about offshore wind, you're talking about clean energy generation, these are extraordinary challenges that we face as a species on an incredibly fast timeline. But it also, the geographic borders of our states are not really the logical place for this. If we're going to take on these challenges, we're going to take them on together. And so it just makes a lot of sense for us to think about ways that we can work together as a region. We have a number of coastal states here. Some of the opportunities for offshore wind are really aligned. And so, I think just sort of breaking down some of those silos, both within our own governments and across some of these geographic boundaries, puts us in a better place to succeed. And it also puts us in a better place to make the case to the Biden administration that we've got a good plan that they should invest in for the future. So.
I would also add that generally, and again, on climate specifically, right, there is this way to leverage the federal funding to really drive an industry that has a very, very high cost, like high upfront cost, but also the potential for this technology to evolve so quickly that you basically need to ensure that you are injecting as much money as possible now so that you can actually drive that technology forward. And the best way to do that for us is ensuring that we are not just, thinking about, and would encourage, the industry, which I know obviously it's part of, the basic math on, where and when to invest, but the reality that you actually have to get it started. And that for us, particularly when we're looking at climate challenges and when we're looking at new technology, this is how we want to make sure that we are leveraging the federal dollars, we're leveraging the state dollars, to ensure that these industries can actually then stand up, and then we can, empower the private sector to do and to expand and to grow.
Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's been summarized pretty well. I mean, whether it's offshore wind or hydrogen hubs or other cooperative agreements we can enter into, the better we all off are. We just Connecticut received a $2 billion award for the Northeast Corridor for rail, and rail's important, right? It's important because a large portion of our lower Fairfield County residents work in New York City, and so they got to be able to get in and out of the city. Other folks want to be able to get from New Haven to Boston or in a timely manner, and so now Connecticut being the #1 choke point, particularly out in eastern Connecticut, this money will make a profound difference in all of us being able to enhance that. But the more we think in terms of region, not only are our grant applications more attractive to those people making the decisions, the more our regional economy can grow. And at the end of the day, as important it is for all the other things that are in, every part of this is important. So please don't think I'm minimizing any one piece. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to move goods and services around our region to sustain our economy, to create jobs, to give the people the economic opportunity that they deserve living in the United States of America.
Yeah, It's a tall order. I mean, I like to say that right now we're asking our infrastructure to do a lot. And we're asking our infrastructure to do a lot that maybe we haven't asked it to do in the past. And I know earlier we talked about, comments were made like there are windows of development. There are moments in time. Minelly, you've been doing this for a little while, an engineer by background. Resiliency was mentioned earlier as well. I know that you were working in New York City on, come back from Sandy. How do you see this moment in time different in how we're investing in this infrastructure to make all of the impacts that we need to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think that more and more it's going to be the case that we need our infrastructure to meet multiple goals. And particularly when there's been, decades of disinvestment in not just building new infrastructure, but even maintaining our existing infrastructure. So this is one of the themes that I think has been constant in my career. When I, started in engineering consulting, working, across all different, kind of programs then, and recognizing that, there isn't just a road project, or there isn't just a water main replacement project, because when you are digging the street, you are, running into a lot of utilities. You may not even know where exactly your utilities and your lines are. And then when you are putting, repaving the road, are you going to make space for a bike lane? Are you going to make space for, a sidewalk that actually addresses accessibility issues in many of our communities? So we really do need to, I think, pivot and start really treating infrastructure for all of the things and all of the ways that they actually support a city. I always think to really try to keep the community kind of lens, right? When I talk to my family about the projects that I'm working on, right? They're like, oh, well, if the state is doing this, and the state is also building this, this building or repairing whatnot, it's just like, to them, it's all the state, right? They're not, they're not separating our different agencies. But we, historically, that's the way that we've been structured. So I do spend a lot of my time, really, honestly, just bringing people to the table. I tell people that I feel like I'm an over communicator. There are certain things that we just need to make sure that we are coming to the table, that we're clearing, that we are, sharing where we are, so that we can actually move forward together. And just naturally, the way that our offices and state government has, and municipal government at all levels really has been structured is with these silos, right? There's, DEP, there's, transportation, and beyond. But the reality, again, is that our communities are not telling the difference, and our investments in infrastructure also are not, we don't have the luxury of actually continuing to look at our investments in that way either.
I was going to come back down the line on another question, which I can hold in the back pocket on our vision for the future. But I think that's a perfect opportunity to open up the room and kind of engage everybody in that discussion, because bringing people to the table, assembling folks here, like this is exactly, walking the walk, so to speak, on how to get this done. So would love to invite questions from the room to the group here.
Don't all speak at once.
Yep.
Oh, we've got one.
Yeah.
Hi, Matt Hart. I'm with the Capital Region Council of Governments, and we serve 38 municipalities in Greater Hartford. So from my perspective, I think our state's doing an amazing job at the state level. With the commissioner's support and the support of the team, our DOT in particular, phenomenal job. My question has to do with how can we increase participation at the municipal level? We've had 17 of our towns apply under the bipartisan infrastructure law over 2 years, so a little less than 50%. I'd like to see that number much higher. I was intrigued by the Rhode Island example, and I would just like to get your thoughts in terms of what more can we do to support local governments across the region to pursue these opportunities. Thank you.
So thanks, Matt. It's a great question. Couple of just observations as I've gone around the state and met with mayors and executive directors like yourself. related to this. There's really, to understand the two challenges we have to quickly understand how the bipartisan infrastructure law is set up. One is that it's set up, as mentioned earlier, in both a plus-up system where we took existing grant programs and we just added more money. So in your mind, if you think about it, if we were going to pave $100 million in roads this year, now we're going to pave $140 million in roads, right? So that's one area. And then the other one was we have new programs, and then we have new competitive programs. So the other 45% of that money is thrown in there, and some of them aren't relevant to the Northeast, but most of them are, right? So what happened is on the plus-up money, I know this is a long answer, but on the plus-up money, what happened is that it went into programs that were already going on, but that construction work ran into things like supply chain issues and inflation. So a lot of it got burned up in inflation. So people are saying, look, man, we're not paving $140 million worth of roads. We're only paving 110. I'm like, yeah, well, 30 got eaten up in inflation, so that's why. It's a very simplistic response, but that's part of the problem here, right? So if you're in that industry of paving, you're like, hey, what the heck? Second piece is now, what about cities and towns? Cities and towns are running into two problems. One is they have not conducted a safety plan for the area. That's for Safe Streets for All. That's a big issue, and I know COGS are on it. I've met with the COGS, and they're doing everything they can to encourage that. They don't have capacity, like's been mentioned, to do those things. They don't have a town planner. They don't have a city planner. They don't have a city engineer. They don't even know where to get one if they wanted one. They're too busy buying textbooks and making sure the potholes are filled. So you sort of run into that a lot. And then the second piece is, I don't want to apply for this grant because if I get the grant and do the design, then I have to go get the implementation money, and I don't have a local match. This is a $5 million project. Where am I going to get $500,000 from? Can I go to a town meeting and ask people for $500,000 and maybe we might get a grant? No. Can I go to a referendum and say I need $2 million to match the other money that's being spent? No, because we don't know if we got the grant. It's a chicken or egg thing, right? So that's where Rhode Island's solution works really well. Love to see a system similar to that, an infrastructure bank, if you will. Bank's really the wrong word because it gets people all nervous, not banking, but a place where you can go and get capacity for a town. You could get potentially matching money if you needed it, and you could get time from either a town planner, engineer, or a grant writer to be able to put everything together for you to be able to get you to apply. But that first step is that safety plan. If you haven't done that, you're automatically dismissed from that. Now Steve, I don't know where you are, but I think we doubled our Safe Streets for All grants. That's for local municipalities, directly to the city or town, right? We doubled them. But it's still a fraction of the cities and towns in the state. And a lot of it, too, is cities and towns are coming to us and they're saying, I want a new senior center. Where do I get the money for that? And they think, I got a checkbook here. Here's $3.4 million. Go have fun. Or I need town hall expanded. Or I need a new firehouse. None of those are encapsulated in the BIL. You can't find them anywhere. I think they're great uses of money, public dollars, but they're just not there. So I think that a more focused outreach effort on all of us in terms of education, but then we have to have answers for those things like, where do I get the match from? And how do I develop capacity to even begin writing this kind of grant? So CCM has hired some grant writers. They're using a company. I know the COGS have tried to staff up with more grant writers. DOT is even doing some work with grant writers to try to direct cities and towns to the right spot. But it's a conundrum. And by the way, and it's the last thing I'll say, these grants are so tightly written that you'll pull your hair out reading them. Like our mayors and first selectmen, they don't have the time, if they're all alone in their office, to weave through this. It's difficult. Hence, again, the Rhode Island solution is a really good way to go about doing something like this. And I've got some ideas, but money's tight and time is short.
Yes, sir. Just to piggyback on that, I think another thing that can help out a lot that I learned, this is my first job in government. I was a corporate attorney here in Connecticut, actually, before I moved back to Rhode Island, my home state. So I kind of treated each city and town like a client that I would have treated in my practice, and just kind of brought in and said, okay, why wouldn't you apply to this stuff? And some of it was they didn't even know where to look. So I had my Office of Management and Budget, when this first came in, I myself wanted to see it organized. We created a spreadsheet of every grant. BIL is just a bunch of grants. Everybody knows it's just a bunch of grants. So all the grants that are available to the state of Rhode Island or to our seasoned towns. So all the stuff we're eligible for, not like the Alaska pipeline stuff or whatever that we're not going to apply for. So we narrowed it down to what states are available or eligible, and also what seasoned towns. And so I took that spreadsheet and I gave it to all of them, and then I offered to meet with each one of them one-on-one. Now, Rhode Island, we only have 39 seasoned towns, so it's pretty easy to do that. I could do it a month. I could walk to all of them if I wanted to. So it's great. Or like lightly jog if it's westerly. But so I sat down, I met with almost every one of them and went through, the line by line, went through the spreadsheet with them and said like, hey, so here's one that you might be interested in, and here's another one, and what are your wants, what are your needs, what do you want to do with infrastructure in your town? And then I would take notes, go back, highlight it, send it to them. Hey, here are some ideas. Because I realized they didn't have the capacity support for that. So some of it is that, and then we also created in Rhode Island, we got passed last year. It finally got launched out about like a month ago. I really wanted it 3 months ago, but it was 1 month ago, and it was the Municipal Matching Fund Pool. So the Rhode Island State Legislature, what we did was we went through the past year plus, said, okay, here's what the seasoned towns applied to, and then took 80% of that, and or 20% of that, and said, legislature, we need this amount of money to put in a pool to allow our seasoned towns to apply for it. So that's for their matching funds. What the mayor and commissioner, I usually say mayor, sorry, mayor. I knew him as mayor when I was here, so what the mayor said, was a lot of these seasoned towns like Portsmouth, Rhode Island, super small. It's on a Quidneck Island. Fun history fact: that's what the Rhode Island is actually a Quidneck Island. The rest is the Providence Plantations, although no more. We can talk about that later if you want a sidebar. So anyways, Portsmouth said to me, like, I'm not applying to this grant. They really need it. I said, why? They said, well, we can't afford the match is $200,000. We're like $1 million in the red. We can't do it. Like, okay. So now they can apply for these matching funds. We provide 80% of the 20% because my governor likes them to have some skin in the game. And they're able to go for those grants because they'll have those matching funds. So it's a pool. It's run through our infrastructure bank, which we have an infrastructure bank, and so yeah, that's an idea. But a lot of that is just kind of going and listening to them and sitting down and asking why, and like why aren't you applying for this, and then trying to find solutions for them. So thanks.
So I just might add just a little bit. So some of the structure that I was talking about, we created by executive order. So we had an executive order, created my position, created our office, created the interagency vehicle and the federal funds partnership. But we identified the same challenge that Mark is talking about. Our fiscal analysts think that there's somewhere between $17.5 and $18.5 billion left for Massachusetts over the next 3-4 years of these programs, and we think that matching fund would, to leverage that, because we do see exactly what we're talking about here, which is when you put skin in the game, we tend to get the grants, and when you don't, it's much harder. We think that there's about $3 billion that we need to put forward to match that. We have about $2 billion to do that. So we've asked the legislature for another $800 million for match. We have an innovative mechanism for that. We're in a very high interest rate environment, and we have a large stabilization fund. So we're not planning to tap the stabilization fund, but we are planning to utilize the interest on the state stabilization fund to create a pay-go capital fund, and then use 3 years of that interest for federal matching funds. We also have a couple of other proposals in that piece of legislation. One is, so in addition to having a $2.75 billion to devote to state matching funds, we've also proposed the creation, as we've talked about here, of a state infrastructure bank. So we've asked for money to put that in. We recently created a community climate bank, which is focused on green affordable housing, and I know Connecticut has a climate bank as well. But we'd like to create an infrastructure bank to leverage for some of the purposes that you're talking about. So you've got grant funding or state matching fund, and you've also got loan capacity. And then that also creates additional capacity to create a technical assistance unit. So we do a lot of technical assistance within our existing unit and with some of our partners and state agencies. But we do propose a chunk of money, it's $12 million, to create a new unit for the next 3-4 years to do technical assistance. So the vision here, as I see it, is, if you sort of think about the challenges that the municipalities and the tribes face, there's a bunch of them, right? One of them is this stuff's complicated, right? There's just so many silos, so much jargon, really hard to know which of these are good opportunities for you. So we need to provide good information, actionable information on time in English about what the opportunities are. We need to be able to provide state matching funds so that there's skin in the game so that you can make these grants competitive. You need technical assistance, and as Mark talked about, implementation assistance. So not just can we help you write the grant, but what happens if you're the dog that catches the car and you actually get the darn federal grant? The problem is that's the beginning, not the end of the work. So we need to have that implementation support and then flexible loan capacity to make your finance plans add up. And then you layer onto that a deep proactive commitment to climate, labor and workforce, and some of these equity provisions. Those things will start to score well in the kind of matrices that the career folks use. And that is, sort of the vision for how you debug the kinds of things that get in the way of people applying for these grants.
Very, very well put. Absolutely. Do we have, I think, skin in the game and come to the table big takeaways?
Thanks.
We got another question there. We got a microphone coming your way.
Sorry, Bryce Chenault with the Yankee Institute. A topic that I thought maybe would be talked about a little bit more today, given 2035 coming, each of these states, and pending in Connecticut, the Regulation Review Committee will consider electric vehicle mandate here in the state. Is there a consensus across the states on how much more energy is going to need to be created to meet that demand on the grid? And then how is that demand going to be met without decreasing reliability or increasing costs on consumers?
These are the questions I stay away from at NGA because I am not the energy guy, and I'm thankful for that. I'm just a former DOT guy trying to.
I mean, I'll just say big picture, right? There is not one solution for this problem. So we are looking at all the things in parallel, and particularly looking at how we can, again, leverage the funding that is currently available. And for us is on all fronts, right? We have, we're very fortunate in New York last year passed the Environmental Bond Act, and that's $4 billion specifically focused on these pots or these pockets of the climate agenda. Obviously, the electricity and the power grid, and the fact that we're just going to be putting more load on the grid as we try to also transition, whether it's our equipment at home, our vehicles, and beyond, also onto the grid. But again, I mean, there's not one solution, and for us is really how are we supporting the industry, how are we supporting the private sector, so that we are getting past the technology and that starting capital aspect of a lot of these for a lot of these investments, so that we are kind of moving the needle on the technology, and as we're able to advance the technology, the goal is really that the cost will start to go down. But it's a loaded question. It's a loaded question.
I mean, it's got to be a whole of government strategy. As I mentioned, one of the first things that our governor did was create a cabinet level climate chief and put out a climate strategy. And, I mean, I think that it has to encompass a whole bunch of different things. One of the pieces is we just need a ton more clean energy generation, right? And so you need a massive increase in capacity for wind, for solar, for geothermal, and we also need massive increases in the capacity of the grid to handle that. You need to decarbonize buildings all across the state. You have to electrify everything, including vehicles and rail. And then you have to get at some of the hard to electrify sectors, heavy industry, aviation, and try and debug some of those challenges. At the same time, we also have to be thinking about these huge increases in resiliency challenge. And a lot of us, spend a lot of our time sort of thinking about water and flooding and, and coastal resiliency. And, these bills are complicated, but part of the reason why these federal government programs are so complicated is the solutions at the scale that we need to deal with are also quite complex. And so, there are pockets of money to electrify vehicle fleets, and build chargers and, for mode shift and trying to get people out of their cars and into transit. And, unfortunately, it's going to not have to be like we do one of these things well. We've got to do all of these things all at once and build this capacity. And I think some of it is to Minelly's point, some of the things we're doing are going to solve multiple challenges, right? We're going to build green, affordable housing. We're going to start thinking about how transit and economic development and climate are all sort of interrelated kinds of problems.
I would just add that we in Connecticut have a unique problem in the sense that we need significant enhancements and improvements to the distribution side of our electrical grid, the distribution being the part that actually hooks up to your home. Much of it's antiquated, much of it goes back to the 40s and 50s and 60s, so it's really inefficient. And we have the problem that our biggest supplier, Eversource, along with UL or UI, I always get them mixed up, UI. They always, they want to put those costs in your charge on your bill. So if I'm going to upgrade the grid, then I want you to pay for it. And you're saying, but it's not my grid. Why should I have to pay for your grid to deliver electricity, right? So there's that internal battle, even now for smart meters, which can help because if you can make the grid about 20% more efficient, it actually generates that much more power that you can power so many X more cars, right? But unless we have a comprehensive plan of who's going to pay for the smart meter in your house, and unless we have a comprehensive plan for who is going to pay for the back end to that, to leverage all the data we're now pulling from your home, so that I know that you go to work every day from 9 to 5, but Johnny works from 6 to, or is Johnny's home when you're at work, therefore I can power you down a little bit and I can give him the energy he needs to charge his car. I only can get that off of smart meters, and as one example. And then I need a back end to be able to process all that information, to be able to turn on and turn off people, to get a more efficient delivery system of just electricity, not counting what we talked about already, which is generation, and we have to have more electricity. And, and I think that's part of the problem, and I'll ask this question. Steve loves when I ask this question. For those folks that are still here, how many drive an EV as your daily driver? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And 5. Okay, so we got 5 out of roughly 100 people or 80 people that are in the room. 6. I'm sorry if I missed you over there. So we still don't have the critical mass of adoption that will demand these kinds of enhancements to the grid to be able to power the things that we need to power. So it's a little bit of a chicken or egg thing, and it's part of the reason is you can't find a charger when you're driving, which is what our job is, to land more chargers. We can't land as many chargers as we want because the grid won't be able to power the charger, so it becomes this all-encompassing problem, and we slowly start nibbling on it. As Minelly said, I think technology will catch up. I think our batteries are going to last longer. We're still going to need the same amount of energy, though. It doesn't mean you don't need the same. But I think you're going to be able to go farther, which is going to reduce charging insecurity, which is going to basically spur more demand. So I think once we have that critical mass, it'll demand improvements to the grid, and then we're going to have to figure out how to pay for it. I'd also say, and I just think about this all the time because I drive around and think about useless things, but think about this phone, right? 1995, 94, people were walking around with boxes for phones. And it was like a goof if everybody had a cell phone. Then by 98, 99, everybody wanted that flip phone razor. And we started landing towers everywhere. There was no networks in parts of the United States of America. By the end of the 2010s, you could get a signal coast to coast on any carrier. I don't care who it is. Demand drove that improvement and enhancement to the grid. So we have got to, government can't create the market, but we can create demand. And we've got to do that by making sure we have a grid that can support it. I think we're getting there. It's just going to be slow, and it's somewhat frustrating. I don't necessarily think electric is the only way to go either. I mean, hydrogen's making a big play, so you never know.
I'd just like to refer you, just if you could, there's actually GRIP is Grid Resiliency, and then I forget what IP stands for, but there are funds in IIJA, and it's
Yeah.
specifically, I mean, it's designed really well for that, so I'd refer you to check that out. You know, it's not only just state, but also part of GRIP is only for utility companies. So Rhode Island, we obviously only have one utility. I mean, we've got another smaller one, but it's much smaller. But it's Rhode Island Energy, very aptly named. And so there's our Department of Energy, or DOT, and Rhode Island Energy are working together because of how the funding was designed. So it's the GRIP funds. Rhode Island got, one of them is $50 million over 5 years, which is big money in Rhode Island. But it's to solve, you know, that problem as well, and others. But I know part of the loading issue is that's what those funds are designed for. So, be a good thing to check out.
Well, I think we have one more question, and I think Mark promised cocktails soon.
A follow-up on the question about energy. Our neighbors to the north in Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire, you know, being somewhat of an impediment to getting more Hydro-Quebec energy down from Quebec. New York has direct connections to Hydro-Quebec and has the New York Power Authority and all the hydro dams. We don't, and particularly in Connecticut, we have some of the highest electric costs. So that's why I assume you're meeting with them as well, because that's, you know, international issue of how do we get more electricity down from Quebec. And then at the other end is our actual privately owned buildings, you know, are predominantly in this part of the country very, very old. And like I live in a building that was built in 1964, has 50 amp service. There's no chance that we can electrify anything when you have 50 amp service. And that's common across our Northeast. So it's not even the electric grid, it's even the buildings themselves. So those are I guess my two comments, yeah.
Thank you.
We are meeting with those Quebec people, actually.
Yeah.
I was wondering what that meeting was in my calendar like 5 months ago, but then I realized it's a pretty interesting pipeline that's coming down. So, yeah.
All right, so if I could just wrap this up, if you're a city or town that's represented here and you want more information, you want to know, look, how do we do this? Give us a holler. We'll take a ride out. Steve and I will. We have a really good searchable database. You can plug in sewer and see every grant that's available for sewer. You can see every grant that's available for intersections and things like that. We'll try to get you pointed in the right direction to start. We'll try to look for some capacity for you to get somebody to help write up the specific details of that grant application or not. And one of the best things I had was that, Tom, you had a speaker, Pollock from Massachusetts. Stephanie.
Yeah.
Fascinating person. She actually set up an FAQ on her page, and she's with FHWA, I think, right?
Yep.
Federal Highways, that says why not to apply for this grant.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a whole page just telling you don't apply for it because there's just too much that goes with it. And sometimes that's the case. And so we may tell you, look, it just doesn't make sense for your community. Steve and I talked to somebody last week where they wanted, you know, $10 million for something. I said, you just got to pay for it. I mean, there's no federal grant out there for that. So we'll help you with that too. So thanks, Tom.
Absolutely. Well, I would love everybody to give a big hand to Mark for pulling everybody together and his team, Stephen, Taylor, Tiffany, the whole team that you put together is really fantastic, and you guys really are leading things out there in this group, in the region, and nationally. So, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.